The head is ready, let's go for the rest of the body. As you see here, you have a lot of airbrush work, has a height value. We have to match it with the tone of the face. Also, we have to focus in these individual facial features, well, anatomy, like the neck. I will jump this step because it's too long. The thing you have to know here is that the sculptor sometimes, even if it is a really good sculptor, in your eyes maybe you want a more specific or a more detailed anatomy, so you have to sculpt with paint. First thing to notice is that the skin has a height value because of the airbrush. So you have to get and try to match it with a more saturated skin tone. You get a wash of that mid-tone that had this tone of orange and try to focus mostly in the mid-tone of the skin. You can go a bit on top of the highlights, but try to let the wash and change the mid-tone to a more orangey tone, like this one. You see, in one step it changed totally the skin of the breasts. Now it's time to add highlights. You get the skin tone with a lot of value, maybe could be like a sunny skin tone with a bit of white, and start pointing in the breasts with the glaze pointing technique. Remember, a lot of dilution like a glaze, dry really well the brush in the paper, test it in your nail. It has to paint barely and start pointing the surface. You want to do a good light between the mid-tone and the previous layer. A fun fact is that this technique, I started using it because I wanted a substitute of the airbrush. This means that in smaller areas I couldn't use the airbrush because it's too small. The point of the stroke of the brush is too small. So I started testing this glaze pointing technique, and it's perfect to paint little surface. In this case, as you see, is not the highest highlight, is a bit in the one level up of the highlight is a big surface, so we can still use the airbrush. We can do the both. We can do the point technique, but we can speed a lot our work using the airbrush in this preliminary state of the highlights. So let's get it. With this tone is more or less the same that we use in the brush. We start placing the highlight, dividing. Remember, you have to divide like we did with the face, divide the light in three. This is highlight, mid-tone and shadows, and start placing the highlights in the most exposed part, in this case of the breasts, and try to let a little margin, a little side of saturation between these highlights. We use the face as a good reference to try to match it with the breasts in this case, and slowly we're getting there. Now this is a result. We obtain like a pastel looking, a feminine looking, and it's really close to the face. Now let's go for the shadows. Remember that grayish type of tone, grayish purple tone of shadows. So let's do it again, the same technique. We get like a glaze pointing technique. Even you can give strokes, because if you want to do this half moon, is sometimes better to do strokes. And you place that shadow in the silhouette of the breasts. This means that when you do the principal picture, you have to see the silhouettes in shadow of the breast. This is really important to add volume to the figure. To remember that we not only paint below the breast, we paint in the silhouettes, in the sides of them. Remember that here the important thing is to place well the stroke. If it's strong, don't worry, because we want this. We are aggressive painters, and to do a smooth stroke but with intention, the solution here is quite simple, and you know it. You have to unify. This is a wash with the mid-tone, or with a skin highlight of skin, and you place it over the shadows, so you obtain these smooth shadows. What happens when we unify? That we lose a bit highlights and the tone, or the orangey tone of the mid-tone. So using again the airbrush, more or less the color could be like red leather from Vallejo. I get a wash and start placing it over the mid-tone, again respecting, or with the idea of playing with the silhouettes of the breasts and of all the anatomy of the area. Maybe this might be a bit chaotic for you, but this is a lot of knowledge for you. If you get it wrong, if you get too strong, or if you want to unify, you have here in the video these techniques that allows you to do this. We do the same, we add this mid-tone, this saturation in the other breast, but a fun fact or interesting fact is that you have noticed that I didn't place a shadow in the skin of the right breast. This is because the position of the breast, the position of the light is different than in the other breast. The shadow has to be done in the bikini thing. Now, as always, we analyze our work and we see if it's something lacking. For me, remember the rebounding of light that's coming from below and affecting the side of the breast was a bit loose. So we get again the highlight tone, and we do it with airbrush, really gentle. Try to follow the steps of the sketching part we did in the first videos. Here, my mistake, because we always make mistakes and I love showing it to you because you learn. I was doing not a so roundish breast. This was a bit square. If you notice, if you watch closely to the shape, for example, the shadow shape is not so round. It's a bit like square. This might be a little perfectionist, but this is the way to achieving a good job, or let's say to have more satisfaction with you as a painter, as a creator, and as an artist. So the solution here could be placing, again playing with the mid-tone, so we create a better and saturated mid-tone with just pure orange with a bit of brown, and start playing again with the silhouettes of the breast, trying to stop in the place that it need a more rounded shape. We try to follow the shape of the mid-tone, like in this part. Like now you see the difference. It's really subtle, but you can see that the breast is much so rounded now by the mid-tone, and it creates this illustration effect. This also follows a rule. You have to study anatomy. I don't know this because I'm a master painter. I know this because I copy other masters. I have to study other guys and women that do it better than me, and also in reality. Also studying anatomy in real life, how reboundings of light works. Now we get advantage of our saturation tone, that finally we found the one, and start placing it in the rest of the body. Why I paint the breast first, why I paint the face first, then the breast, then the rest of the body? Because of motivation. I want to test the colors. I want to get used to the things I'm feeling in the face and in the skin. And if I get it wrong, it's really difficult to change it in the whole skin than in one side of the face, than in one breast. Also, because of motivation, if you see the breasts now, they are nearly finished, you motivate yourself to continue painting the rest of the skin. Painting is a lot of motivations. So you have to find your own way to paint. that feels more comfortable for you. After a big step, we stop and we analyze. What do you see? It's getting better, right? Slowly it's getting better. Now needs a bit of highlights. We get again the highlight tone, in this case with a bit more of white. The same technique, pointing glaze, or glaze pointing, whatever you want to name it. Test it in your nail, it barely has to paint, remember it's a glaze, and you place that little dots in the left part of the breast in the top, creating a type of circular shape that the more you focus in the center of that shape, the more amount of points you have to paint, and in the surroundings you can get a bit wider and give distance between that points. The beautiful thing of this is that add texture, and you try to eliminates the artificial looking of the airbrush. The airbrush is really good for large parts, as you can see here, but for smaller parts like this one, it's better to use the brush. It gives a more natural looking, a more human looking. We stop, we do a review, we criticize ourselves, and it needs a bit more, a punch more of white, a punch more of contrast. So we add a bit more of white in the mix of the highlight, and we do the same, but now in a smaller area than before. This is max highlights. The first mistake here, the easiest and the simplest mistake, is to don't place the highlights in a correct position. They have to be parallel between them in the top part of the breast. But if you watch closely, you can see that that breast I was painting before has less large highlight than this one. Why? Because this breast, the left breast, is more closely to the focus, to the principal light, so it has affected by a stronger light, like we saw in the face. We analyze, and now they are finished, right? So with this technique, first using the brush to add intention, then get the airbrush to unifying those strokes and to give that pastel and feminine looking, use the airbrush to give saturation, then get again the brush to finish the tiny details. We finish the rest of the body. I didn't want to show all the process of the body because it's the same. I feel like I will give you a lot more of information, overload your brain. So if you know how to do the breast and the skin, you know how to do the rest. An important thing that's missing here is that the cast shadows, the proper arm that's projecting a cast shadow, all the metal, all the trimmings. I will explain this further in the other steps of the video. This is the last thing you have to do when you paint the skin and when you finish the figure. Don't finish your figure without paying attention to the cast shadows. This is the last detail, the last professional detail that we'll explain further. Now let's go and do the tattoo.